Welcome to Quality Time with MoreSteam. I am your host, Dan Swartout. Before I introduce today's guest, Razgaitis from FloWater, I wanted to make you aware of a few things that have happened recently at MoreSteam that you might be interested in. On March 27th, MoreSteam's own Ken Robinette hosted a webinar on exploring the convergence of CI frameworks and agile methods. Very informative webinar, a lot of good information. And the video for that webinar is now on the MoreSteam website, and I will put a link to the webinar in the show notes, so check that out. And then on April 1st, MoreSteam released its annual April Fool's joke, The Power of 7 video. So check that out, have a few laughs. It's the Power of 7 video, April Fool's. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. We've got the webinar. We've got the April Fool's video, lots of great content coming to you each and every week from MoreSteam. Today's guest is the co-founder and CEO of FloWater, Razgaitis. Most people call him Raz. I've been calling him Raz since the second grade because we have been friends since the second grade. And it has been fun and exciting to watch Rich's career grow and evolve over the years. Rich is a very successful entrepreneur and business leader. We're going to learn about Rich. We're going to learn about FloWater. We're going to learn about his career. FloWater was recognized by Inc. magazine for 3 consecutive years as one of the fastest growing privately held companies in the United States. FloWater now has thousands of new tech FloWater refill stations installed in schools, gyms, offices, and hotels across the country. Rich got both his undergrad and his MBA from Anderson University, where he also played on the football team. Before FloWater, Raz had worked for both large multinational companies and smaller startups. Really excited to bring you this conversation with Raz. We're going to hear his thoughts on leading a team, on leading a business, growing a business. It's a great conversation, and it got started in kind of an unusual way. When Rich and I were both kids, I used to read all sorts of books about UFOs. I checked out every book about UFOs you could from Barrington Elementary School in Upper Arlington. And Rich remembered that, and he mentioned that at the beginning of the interview, and it kind of cracked me up a little bit. So it was a real fun way to get started with my old friend, Rich Razgaitis. We are lucky enough to be joined today by the co-founder and CEO of FloWater, Rich Razgaitis. And I am thrilled to have Raz on the program today for a number of reasons. One, a very successful business person and entrepreneur. So I'm very excited to get his thoughts, perspectives, and experiences in the business world. But beyond that, Rich and I have been friends since the second grade in Miss Bloom's class at Barrington Elementary, where we had units on corn and cars and apples. And I'm so excited that all these years later, I get to have you on the show. Raz, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to reconnect 40 years later, from Miss Bloom's class to doing a podcast with you. I think we made some progress. I don't think she had these level of aspirations for us
Probably
when we were in second grade.
Probably not at the time, as we were both in moon boots. They did not think this.
Talking about UFOs, which it seems like you turned out to be right, by the way. It seems like that the general consensus is that you were a pioneer in those theories.
Rich, so glad to have you on the show. Welcome. Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit about FloWater as we get started. Inc. magazine has recognized in the past FloWater as one of the fastest growing privately held companies in America. So obviously a huge success story, and I want to hear all about it. Tell us a little bit about FloWater, what it is and what it does.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. So FloWater was rooted in this fundamental premise that every single human deserves access to clean drinking water that they can trust. And that water is a fundamental human right. And also that there's a responsibility to deliver this to consumers without the contaminative effects of single-use plastics. So what that really means is our mission is to deliver water wherever consumers work, rest, and play. That's the world's best tasting, most trusted water that's free of having to be wrapped in a plastic bottle. And in the US today, we don't have a problem called if I could only find a faucet. The problem is that people don't like what's coming out of that faucet, which is why they reach for bottled water, which is the problem that we're trying to solve for. So the thing to solve for is like make plastics more recyclable. People don't recycle. The problem to solve for is how do you get people to fall in love with tap water? And that's effectively what we're doing by building FloWater devices that go into schools, gyms, hotels, corporations, someday the home, and there beyond.
I want to talk more about FloWater a little bit later on, but I want to know a little bit more, Raz, about your experiences and what led you to this point. So obviously we went to high school together, class of 1992 at Upper Arlington High School here in Central Ohio. Then you went off to Anderson University where you played college football. And from Anderson, one of your first leaps into the corporate world was at Eli Lilly. And so a lot of your career has been spent at startups. Eli Lilly, of course, a large multinational corporation. What do you think are some of the biggest differences between working at a large established company and working at a startup?
Well, I think the most acute difference that I can talk about is one where I actually just had this conversation with numerous candidates. I'm interviewing for a chief sales, chief revenue officer in the company right now. And I've actually been discussing this with them, which is in a big company on a scale of 1 to 10, you get a lot of 4s, 5s, and 6s in terms of the enjoyment kind of love factor of working there. And in entrepreneurial, early stage startup companies, I think it's much more bimodal than that. You get a lot of 1s, 2s, and 3s, or 8s, 9s, and 10s. And the reason for that partly is just the peaks and the troughs of it. You know, in an early stage in an entrepreneurial company that's underway fast growth, or maybe you're fighting for growth, or maybe you're trying to recover from some cataclysmic event, or just start the company, you're going to have a lot of peaks and troughs, and there's nowhere to hide. I mean, this is one of the things that in a small company, there is nowhere to hide. Everyone has to be pulling on an oar in the boat. And if you're not, you're taking someone's seat that could be pulling on it. And it's not just pulling on it, but you got to be pulling well. You've got to be doing your job. You can't kind of be doing your job. And so I think in big companies, you know, status quo, I know one at a big company would say status quo gets rewarded, but in bigger companies, you know, of course you have much fewer peaks and troughs. But the second thing is most people are not making decisions to win in big companies. They're making decisions not to fail. And I don't mean that as a criticism, but you know, sometimes the MO is like, hey, don't screw this up. Like, yeah, of course they want to grow. And I worked with some badasses in big companies, like real badasses that were great leaders, great at getting stuff done, but you just can't take as much risk. You're not going to get stretched. You're not going to, in the same way, you're going to get stretched in different ways, more vertically, I think. Whereas in an early stage company, you know, one day you're in one project in one department, another day you're selling, another day you may be working on a fundraising pitch deck, and another day you're installing a FloWater unit, and another day, you know, you're dealing with an insurance issue. And in an early stage, you know, when you only have 5, 7, 8 people, sometimes you're pulling bits and pieces into all sorts of things. So I have nothing but props and a great respect for my time at J&J and Eli Lilly, though it also became pretty clear to me early on that I was not going to be a lifer there, and that I just had an itch to do something different.
So you leave the big corporate world and move into smaller companies, startups, and you were able, before you got to FloWater, and of course at FloWater, you've achieved tremendous growth, but you were able to achieve at companies before you got to FloWater, rapid growth as well. At those companies, what in your mind is the secret to unlocking that type of growth?
Well, in terms of growing, I mean, the first thing I want to say is it's just very rarely a nice, strong, straight line up and to the right with a hockey stick. You know, it is more often than not a jagged line. And you can look at numerous companies. You can read, you know, going back to Howard Schultz's book, Pour Your Heart Into It. He wrote in the late 90s, early 2000s. Maybe it was later than that. I don't have a very good sense of time on that book at this point. But you look at that to the Waze to numerous other companies, there are a lot of jagged lines up and down, and ultimately, like God willing, and do the right thing, and you get some luck along the way, along with having a great team and product market fit, you start to move your business up into the right. And so I can tell you there's a few things that I think about solving for early stage, and then I can tell you a couple things that I think are success factors along the way. One is early stage companies, venture capital backed companies typically fail for one of three reasons. 80% of them fail because there's no product market fit. So they think they got a great product, but no one in the market, dogs won't eat the dog food, so to speak. Number two, they run out of capital. Number three, there's some material breakdown, like failure at the leadership level or the team level, just material breakdown. And so, one is solving as best you can for the variables that are most commonly associated with a fatal outcome. And so I think that's not going to necessarily make for a successful company. Having plenty of capital, having good product market fit is not going to make for a successful company. But if you don't have those things, and also with team, but if you don't have those things, chances are you're going to have a failed company. So one is isolating variables that reduce risk along the way. In that thinking can be applied to, a 30-year-old privately held insurance company in Columbus, Ohio, or a logistics business, or a new tech company, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. It's not just early stage startups. The variables will be different, but the concept is the same. And it's kind of the 80-20 rule, which is, my guess is that in most businesses, 3 or 4 things are the things that'll cause a fatality. On the positive side, or like what gets to growth, I just keep coming back to team. And when I look at great teams that I've had over time, they've had several characteristics that are quite consistent. One is, I would call them creators rather than facilitators. So in a big company, you do need people that are facilitators. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't mean that term at all pejoratively or negatively. However, in an early stage, or if you're trying to grow, you need someone that's a creator. More specifically, I look for somebody, I call it force of nature. In fact, I probably talked 20 minutes with my leadership team yesterday about this as it relates to some candidates that were coming on board. Is I want someone to err on the side of being an extreme force of nature that will get stuff done and blow through doors to make it happen. And sometimes that's a little bit at odds with teamwork, and that's the second one, which is you do need to have people that are great teammates, collaborators, but they need to be athletic teammates. It's not church choir teammates. It needs to be people that are willing to butt heads in the huddle or on the sideline or on the practice field to be like, hey, you're not picking up your slack. Like you got to get on this, or you got to make that cut, or you got to make that kick, or you got to make that catch, or you got to make that block. You need people on the field, so to speak, in business that are not just like collegial teammates. Of course you want that, but I also want competitive teammates that are going to push other people and bring them along, including me. I want someone to tell me. I was doing a video podcast last night, and I had a guy that was taping me, and I asked him, I'm like, give it to me straight. How was that cut? He's like, not your best. I'm like, tell me why. He's like, here's why. I'm like, great, let's do it again. I'd do it again. I'd be like, how was that? He's like, not so great. Tell me why. Told me why. Did it again. We were there for an hour filming, and I finally got it. At the end of it, he's like, you nailed it. But that, without a barometer, it's easy to get kind of lost in your own head. So those are some of the characteristics that I think are really important: is force of nature, creators, teamwork. Of course, there are things like integrity and truth telling that are absolute bare minimums. Like if you can't trust somebody, then you can't have them on the team, because it's a material breakdown thereafter.
Growth brings its own challenges. You want growth, obviously, but it brings new challenges to the table. How do you address those challenges that come with growth?
Well, it depends on the challenge. Every stage is a little bit different. I can tell you one thing that, trying to take a company from, I've been in a variety of different stages. So I've been at Fortune 500 companies, J&J, Eli Lilly, where I was part of a team that had massive budgets and massive revenues, to early stage companies where I've been from $1 to $1 million in revenue. And then I've been at companies where we took it from 30 million to 100 million in revenue. And so what I can tell you is 0 to 1, I think, is the hardest thing. I mean, taking something from nothing and then creating a business model and extracting out of it. But it's wildly different than going from like 10 to 20 million or 20 to 50 or 50 to 100. And so I think one thing that really is helpful to addressing the various business challenges at various stages is to have a really honest internal audit at the end of every year where you try to start to break things that are possibly fundamental to what got you to the first million or the first 10 million, and look at ways that you may need to break it and do it differently. And it's really difficult. It's easy to say that. It's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to say, hey, we've been doing this for 5 years. It's gotten us to where we are, but maybe we should ditch this or considerably modify it and do something else, because the something else is what gets us to 20 million or 50 million. And it's hard to do that with projects and strategies and initiatives. One of the reasons it's hard is because you get familiar with what you've done. Another reason it's hard is because a lot of people just don't want to say, hey, I'm wrong, or I've changed my mind. You should be changing your mind if you're running a company or if you're in a leadership position in business. I mean, if you're not changing your mind, it's basically saying you're not taking any data points in and learning anything along the way, and that you're just being stuck on your perceived rightness. And so, that's the second reason it's hard, just because of human behavior and you've kind of been defending a position. And the third is because sometimes it results in the change or modification of the people. Like the people that you have in an organization that are required to start it up are sometimes quite a bit different than you have when you're trying to get from 15 million to 50 million. And making some of those people changes in seats or in roles or even within the organization can be really, really painful. And those are a few things that have to be addressed as you're going through the ups and downs of, running an organization from one stage to the next stage. Otherwise, you're just going to be pretty tepid with, potentially very slow growth. And some companies are really comfortable and fine with that. But I've tried to orient myself around companies where we're achieving high growth. It's not always been the case, but that's been the orientation and the desire.
When you are running a startup, I imagine there have to be some challenges when it comes to recruiting talent and retaining talent. I feel you really have to sell them on a vision. I feel you probably have to sell them on you. You have to sell them on Raz. Is that true?
Well, I think there's a really good balance between selling them on that, and then in the pharmaceutical industry, we used to call it fair balance. And the fair balance is, if you tell the positive or the indicated use of the drug, you also have to read the warnings, the warning label. And so I actually literally use that line when I'm talking to candidates, and I'm doing a bunch of interviews right now. And I'm like, look, let me give you the fair balance, because I'm really good at selling this company, because I really believe in our mission and what we're doing, and that it is good and it is necessary, and that we're going to solve we're going to be a part of solving a big problem in the marketplace. So I get very obviously excited about that because I'm a believer. And I have to be careful when I do that, because I also want them to know, here's what's at stake. Here's what you're going to find difficult. Go talk to these other executives or these other people on my team and ask them what they don't like about the company. Ask them about their worst day. Ask them about my worst day. Ask them what they don't like about working for me. Because I'd rather them know going in as best they can the total picture of me. At the end of the day, though, the people that are going to jump into a company early stage, so much of it does have to do with leadership. I mean, at the end of the day, people buy into people, not products. People are buying into missions and the leadership team. And of course, yes, for sure, that, includes me as well. And that works, that can work favorably and that can work disfavorably. And, you really have to treat that with, I think, a healthy level of self-confidence in just what you're doing, but not arrogance, and try not to let that span into arrogance, and ensure that you have a healthy dose of humility with it. I try to tell people, hey, here's how I am wired. Here are the things that I am passionate about. Here's how we're going to build this business and the types of people that I'm looking for. And then I'll tell them the ones that don't work out. I'll tell them exactly why, exactly how, from my perspective. And the employee that doesn't work out, I'm sure they have a slightly different or moderately different perspective. I don't think it's vastly different, because I generally kind of understand at the end of the day, what their perspective was, and whether I agree with it or not is not important. I just want to understand their perspective. So, yeah, it's an important part of it. And it's a balance of not letting that get to your head, and also, making sure you're evangelizing the right things, but also doing it with enough fair balance so that you're not pulling the wrong people into the right organization.
Tell me about the beginning of FloWater. I read a story of meeting somebody at a coffee shop in the Bay Area, and this was really the impetus for what became FloWater. Could you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. I met a guy who is the founder of FloWater, got introduced via just a personal connection. He had this business plan and this concept around FloWater, and presented that to me. And he was looking at in the process of raising funding. And literally from that first coffee shop moment on, I mean, I thought I was going to go to a 45-minute meeting. We ended up talking for 4 hours.
Wow.
And before you know it, we merged paths. I had just gotten done finishing the sale of a tech company, and I was serving as an interim role for a nutritional products company. I hadn't yet kind of declared a decision on what I was going to do next. And it just intersected at the right time. And I got really passionate about three things. One is big problem to solve for that no one was solving for. Number two, there's a huge plastics problem, and it's been in existence for decades. And certainly notably over the last 10 years, but it's not been noticeable to the mass market and major market at large until the last year or two. And then, third is this issue with everything from like carbonated, caffeinated crap to chronic dehydration. And so there were three things that really appealed to me about this. And over the course of time, it's been 11 years now. 11 years later, I've got a team of 65 people that are here in Denver,
Wow.
Colorado. We've got people all over the United States. We're now part of another entity. We're now a division of what was once a strategic investor. But to date, we've saved around 845 million single-use plastic water bottles from the oceans, lakes, rivers, and landfills. And we're going to cross the 1 billion bottles saved threshold in October or November of this year. So I give a ton of props and credit to customers, investors that have believed in us along the way. My parent company that was an investor early on, big props to them. But then, mostly the team, just they've done an incredible job of carrying this mission forward.
What was it like looking at Inc. magazine and seeing that your company, the company that you co-founded, that you're the CEO of, is listed as one of the fastest growing privately held companies in America? How did that hit you?
I'll tell you, that was a great experience because it felt like validation. But I'll tell you what, there are two other experiences that topped it. And I'm going to share them real quickly because they're going to be unexpected. Because you think, in Inc. magazine, I think one year we were 473, number 473 on that list. So we were in the top 500, not just the top 5,000. And so that was really fun for me to be able to see on behalf of the team. And yeah, it's some validation. I try to not get too excited when I see stuff in the press that's good. And I try not to get too bummed when things happen that are bad, or you get cynicism or you get knocked down along the way. Otherwise, you're going to be on some really wild journeys up and down. My highlight that even topped the Inc. magazine, I once was I was in California, and for a while, I lived between two places. And so I was in California for about 10 years. And during my time of living between two places while running FloWater, I remember I was standing at my window on a Zoom, and I'm just on an obscure road in San Mateo, California, which is in Silicon Valley. And I'm talking to somebody about FloWater. And right as I say FloWater, the FloWater truck happens to drive by. And that, for whatever reason, I mean, that was like bigger than Inc. magazine, because I was like, I just saw a truck and on an obscure street drive by. I think we've made it. So Inc. was fun. Some of these other things that happen along the way, when you get your first container shipment or you see your first FloWater truck sighting and you're not actually at work, you're in an obscure location. They're all fun things. And then seeing the team win, that's the best part of it, is seeing them achieve something that they didn't see possible. there've been a lot of cool moments along the way that I'm really grateful for. There've been some really difficult ones too, by the way. So, it's not all what we post on Instagram. And I don't mean that just as a company. I mean that as like humans, of course.
Right.
So we've had some nice wins, but we've had our body blows along the way.
What were some of those body blows, some of those growing pains? What were some of those like?
Well, there's so many to choose from, and I'll try to be selective on a few.
I'd imagine there
One
would have to
certainly
be I would imagine there would have to be so many to choose from any company that attained success. There's never that clear
there isn't.
path. It's those
It's not.
jagged edges you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, 100%. And I know everybody will feel this way. It's a little bit, I think so much of business life is so much like our personal life. And I'll answer the question by just telling kind of a quick metaphor. But I mean, I think, there are I went to Al-Anon, not AA, but Al-Anon, which is for like friends and family,
Mhm.
for about years ago. And one of the things that struck me was the similarity of the stories, but the vast differences of the people. These are people where I'm like, man, I would have no idea that they would be going through this. And I had no idea that they were like, I could think of a lawyer I once heard talking, and I didn't know him personally, but I could kind of just pick the persona and what he must have been like as a lawyer, because I deal with lawyers a lot in my business. I'm like, man, that guy, nobody knows that guy is going through the ringer like this. And it's nobody escapes life unscathed by
Right.
any stretch. And so same goes for business, which is, I think that's the case for everybody. Some have more dramatic experiences than others. And I think have, just like some people really go through the ringer. I'll tell you one of the business experiences. I mean, so many, failing on making hiring decisions. Those are always really tough because you're hopeful. The team, time is money. You are very limited with the types of resources. When there's a team breakdown and you need it to work because, they picked the wrong company, you picked the wrong person, or maybe they were in the wrong role, or maybe you didn't do a good job as a boss, or maybe they just weren't what you thought that they could be. Those are really, really painful. And my takeaway on that is, kind of summarized in the adage, hire slow, fire fast. And it's really hard to do that because you want to hire fast and fire slow. That's like part of human behavior. Is like, oh, I like this person. I need this role filled. I need help. I'm going to pull the trigger. And then you get them in. You're like, no, like they can do this. And maybe I give them a little more coaching, or just don't be so hard on them. Or maybe they don't understand the expectations. And before you know it, you do that too many times and you don't have a good team. And so hire slow, fire fast is a really important takeaway around some of that stuff. But so the hiring, the firing is a really tough one. The second is just scaling, like getting your first product sold. That's hard. It's really hard. But then like trying to get that into 1,000 locations, 10,000 locations, building infrastructure. How do you ship it? How do you pack it? How do you make the unit economics work? Who's the third-party shipper? How do you find a third-party installation when there's no installed supply base? There's no UPS infrastructure for our business as it relates to deploying units. We're basically having to build this infrastructure in many ways, not the shipping part of it, but the delivery, the install, the filter changes. How do we do this in a way that the economics make sense, that the customer will pay for it, that there's enough gross margin for the business, that we can actually build a business around? That's scalable. And how do we do that? Like you can do it 50 times, but can you do it 500 or 5,000 times? Scaling is a really difficult one, and it has been. COVID was brutal with a cash flow negative company where I just hired like 40, 50 people. I was going to go raise in 2020 a Series C financing. In the venture world, they kind of they call them series by stages. And so you get a seed
Right.
round. That's your first money usually. And then series A, B, C. So I'd raised A1, A2, a B, some bridges, and then I was going to go raise a $30 to $50 million Series C. So, we just scaled up, hired a bunch of people, building out all the market economics to warrant a Series C valuation. And then COVID happened. And so it's everything from having to pivot the business model to The company got down to 30 people by the time it was all said and done. I think
Wow.
we were at 88 going into COVID. And then by the end of the second year coming out of it, we were down to 32, 33 people. We were down to the bone, and it was just absolute survival. And it was pivot and push. And, one of the things you learn about business, and this is true in life, everyone knows this. Right? If you don't know this, you'll learn it, unfortunately, is that when things are good, everybody is your friend and everyone is your cheerleader, and it's all their idea. And, that's fine. You want to share the wealth when you have good times. Like, you want to share the credit, you want to share the ideas, you don't want to share the wins. But when things become difficult, you really find out who is in it with you and who's going to ride it out. And that is true whether it is investors or advisors or customers or partners or employees. And one of the highlights that I had, I have to tell you, and I'll end on this because I could talk about like what happened. I could do an entire podcast on what happened during COVID because it was really wild. And we got to the edge. And when I say the edge, we got to the edge several times. And it was
your whole business model is, I'm going to the gym, I'm filling up there. I'm going here, I'm filling up there. When people aren't going anywhere, what do you do?
Exactly. Exactly. And also to add to it, in California, at that time, about 40 to 50% of our business was in San Francisco and LA. Having lived in SF until summer of 2022, periodically, SF didn't leave. I still see everyone driving around in masks when I go back to San Francisco. So I don't know that they've actually fully deactivated from COVID era, but I'll tell you, stuff was still closed through spring of 2022 in SF and LA. And so, yeah, not only were like hotels, schools, gyms all shut down, but then they weren't paying us, and we had all this overhead, and it was very difficult to who do we sell into. And then we were disproportionate in some markets that were really slow to come back. And so, the highlight for me in that, and I really need to highlight this because it was really cool. They were 2.5 brutal years there, and for sure the most difficult in my business career. And of the core leadership group, I didn't lose one person, and they never balked.
Wow.
They went on furlough for periods of time, or at least, they took some salary compression, didn't get bonuses or no raises for years. And this is a time when they were very, very valuable in the market because the market was hiring at above market wages because there was a dearth of eligible, talented leadership employees and management and employees in general. Never once did they balk. Never once did they say, hey, I'm having a hard time hanging on. They would come back to me time and time again and say, like, we're totally behind you. Don't worry about it. Like, we got this. We'll pull it off.
Wow.
It's probably the most emotional moment that I've had over a period of time in my business career was that prolonged experience of support from my direct reports and my leadership team and my employees. Super grateful to them for that.
Thanks, Raz. We'll be right back after this brief message. MoreSteam is the leading global provider of online training, certifications, and technology for Lean Six Sigma. We work with individuals, universities, and businesses, large and small, to provide proven solutions that are right for them. From interactive training to process improvement software, we are here to help you work as efficiently and effectively as possible. Visit MoreSteam.com to learn more. We're running out of time, so I wanted to ask you specifically about running a startup and the roles that you have. You're inspiring your employees, which you were just talking about. You're seeking investors, which you're talking about. You're building the brand. You're the face of the company you were talking about. I remember seeing you on TV, and I thought that was really cool that my friend of so many years is on TV talking about his successes in business. You're running the business while you're doing all these things, inspiring employees, seeking investors, being the face of the brand. How do you manage to do all of these things? How do you do all of this without burning yourself out? And how do you manage the other aspects of your life?
Well, I wish I had a better answer of a storied history of great success in doing that. And I think the most direct answer is I'm still trying to figure that stuff out. One thing that's just an absolute truism is you are going to have to work your ass off. Like there's no, when people say things like, well, I'm choosing to work quality work versus quantity. Well, if you're going to start something, you sure as heck better be doing both. Like it's got to be quality and quantity, because the guy that you're competing against, maybe they're an established company that's been around for 30, 50 years, or maybe it's another company that's got $50, $100 million, or maybe it's a competitor that's working fiercely to do something innovative and go head to head against you. Well, they're probably putting in 12 quality hours a day of like force of nature effort. Now, I don't expect every single person in the company to do that. The work that's required today is different than it was required years ago. But I can tell you one thing is that to this day, I'm 11 years in. There's nobody in my company that will outwork me. They just won't. And I feel like that's partly a responsibility, but then it's partly what's required. Now, that said, you have to be selective about what you're giving up in exchange for that. So you give up things like Netflix and YouTube and idle habits. You give up sleeping in the morning, and so that you can get rocking and rolling at like 5:30, 6 a.m. It doesn't work for everybody. Fine. Then you're going to be burning the midnight oil. You're going to be working until 10, 11, 12, sometimes 2 at night. So part of it is deciding what you're going to sacrifice. And I think the problem that people have is like this whole BS when people say, well, you can have everything. That's a total lie. It's not just a lie. It's such a vigorous deception, because it strikes at the very core of what is true and what does get someone to be successful, which is prioritization, number one, but also kind of execution and implementation of that. And so family is a priority. You might not be able to spend 20 hours a week with your family the way that you would if you were working a 9-to-5 job, but you sure as heck better make sure that you're allocating enough time with enough intention, and that everybody is more on board than off with what you're doing, to be able to balance that. And your fitness journey, is another category, right? Like it's really easy to live off of, caffeinated energy drinks and protein shakes or junk food when you're trying to burn the midnight oil and you're on the road and you're in 3 different cities over a day pitching, raising capital, or back-to-back meetings from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. or whatever it is. And I think it just requires a level of thoughtful discipline around, okay, what's important to me? So what's important to me is, number one, my health and fitness. So I make sure I'm working out. I don't get to work out as much as I'd like to work out, but I'm working out about 30, 45 minutes every day. Some days an hour and 15 minutes. Number
That's
2,
great.
my family. Kids, super important. Got to invest the time in that and make that intentional. Number 3, being successful at work and a terrific, my goal of being a terrific and an outstanding leader. I'm not saying I am. I think I'm not, but my goal is to be the best leader that I can for my team and, be the best at what I do. And then a 4th is, just personal ambitions around, whether that's personal relationships, spiritual development, going to church, having a relationship with God. Those things are all really important. So you can't do it all. I can't go play golf. Would I like to play golf? Love it. Be cool. I haven't played a round of golf in 20 years. Why? I can't make time for that and be good at the other things that I want to be good at. Would I like to play the guitar? Love to. Started to take lessons. Couldn't do it. Thought about going and getting my private pilot's license. Can I spend an hour every week maintaining that after I get my license? Not reliably. Am I going to do that? Nope. Because I can't do that without compromising and sacrificing one of those other 4 areas of my business. So you're constantly making trade-offs, including which friends you spend time with, whether you're dating somebody or not, so on and so forth.
Rich Razgaitis, this has been a tremendous discussion, a tremendous conversation. I have learned so much. Even though we've been friends for over 40 years, I learned a lot from this conversation today. Anything else you'd like to tell us? Where can we learn more about FloWater on the web, social media, things of that nature?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about FloWater, www.drinkflowwater.com or at drinkflowwater on nearly all social handles, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. And then on a personal level, I'm at Rich Razgaitis
Rich, Razgaitis. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We'll include information about you, information about FloWater in the show notes, so you'll be able to check all that out. Rich, this has been so great having you on the show, catching up, hearing about all of your accomplishments. Thank you so much for joining us.
Dan, thanks for having me on. So great to do this reconnection, and I really value our friendship as well as the opportunity to be one of your podcast interviewees. So thank you.
It was great catching up with my old friend Raz, Rich Razgaitis. And yes, Raz has been his nickname since the second grade. We've been friends for more than 40 years, and I really enjoyed having him on the show to share his insights into business and his insights into leadership. Great conversation. Thank you, Rich. And thank you for listening to Quality Time with MoreSteam. You can email the show at qualitytime@moresteam.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. And also, please go ahead and visit our website, MoreSteam.com, to learn about the software and tools that can help you solve problems, eliminate waste, and do things better. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more Quality Time with MoreSteam. Thanks again.